It's regarding the Guadalupe woman. In case you've never heard about it, when I first saw this, I thought it was very interesting, so I wanted to bring it to your awareness. The Guadalupe woman is a well authenticated discovery which has been in the British Museum for over half a century. In 1812, on the coast of the French Caribbean island of Guadeloupe, a fully human skeleton was found, complete in every respect except for the feet and head. It belonged to a woman about 5 foot 2 inches tall. What makes of great significance is the fact that this skeleton was found inside extremely hard, very old limestone, which was part of a formation more than a mile in length. Modern geological dating places this formation at 28 million years old, which is 25 million years before modern man is supposed to have first appeared on Earth. Since such a date for a regular person does not fit evolutionary theory, you will not find Guadalupe woman mentioned in the hominid textbooks. To do so would be to disprove evolutionary dating of rock formations. And it says the Guadalupe woman is a well authenticated discovery which has been in the British Museum for over half a century. When the 2-ton limestone block containing Guadalupe woman was first put on exhibit in the British Museum in 1812, it was displayed as a proof of the Genesis flood. So they're saying that at the time that this piece of limestone was taken from French Guadeloupe in the Caribbean in the 1800s and brought to the British Museum, it was presented, it was on display as proof of the Genesis flood. They were telling people this is an antediluvian look, an antediluvian. But that was 20 years before Lyell and nearly 50 years before Darwin. In 1881, the exhibit was quietly taken down to the basement and remains there to this day. So now we get into the conspiracy, right? The Guadalupe woman, 20 million years old human skeleton. In 1810, the English fleet captured the Caribbean island of Guadeloupe, owned by France, and among the many local trophies captured by the British and taken to England, there was a limestone slab with a skeleton of a woman without a head and hands embedded in it. All right, so they're saying that this was already cut. The French had this, right? Because this was a French owned island. So in 1910, the English took it from them. It was perfectly normal skeleton of a modern type and was discovered in a layer of limestone 1.6 kilometers long on the northeastern coast of the island. All right, so here's again the image. Now it says before the British invasion, many skeletons of ancient animals and only one human skeleton were found in this place by the French. And the modern dating of this layer gives 28 million years. That is, this layer was formed 25 million years before the appearance of man as such. A plate with skeleton was brought to the British Museum in 1812, and the scientist Carl Koenig, all right, so now we get a name, Carl Koenig, who examined the skeleton 2 years later, immediately ran into the dating problems, confirming that it was a modern type skeleton, but honestly admitted that he did not know how old it was. So according to this website, it was brought to this scientist Carl Koenig in the British Museum. He said it was, yes, it is a modern human, but he could never admit to knowing the exact age of it, right? In those years, the study of the remains of ancient people was just beginning. For example, the first bones of Neanderthal man were found only in 1857. Therefore, the ancient skeleton, even with obscure dating, caused a lot of interest and became a permanent part of the museum's collection of natural history. Towards the end of the 19th century, this skeleton began to attract special attention of creationists, supporters of the divine theory of the origin of the world and man. According to them, undoubtedly, a very ancient and yet completely modern human skeleton pointed to the correctness of their beliefs and belonged to a woman who lived before the flood. We're talking about an antediluvian, an Atlantean, in the Caribbean. However, soon a strange skeleton was removed from the museum shelf to the basement, where it should still be under the number PAHR 4128 until 2006. Mention of this skeleton could even be found on the official website of the British Museum, but then it was removed. It's also talking about the Lady of Guadalupe. It says a Miocene Homo sapien with a question mark. All right, here we go. Guadalupe woman discovered. So, what is known about the discovery of the skeleton in 1812? We know from records of the British Museum that Admiral Sir Alexander Forrester Inglis Cochrane, governor of Guadeloupe from January 1810 to 1814, presented it to the museum in 1813. The date of 1812 is when Cochrane became aware of the skeleton, which was among a number of objects taken as booty when the English Navy captured the island from the French. All right. So this guy now we got another lead, right? So now we got who had it. This is the guy supposedly who gave it to the English to bring it to the British Museum. It was in a block of stone that was being prepared for transport to France to be examined by the naturalist Georges Cuvier. A bed of rock more than a mile long close to the Lemuel on the northeastern coast of Guadeloupe was the source of numerous skeletons. You see, that's where they got it from, of which this was just one. So there's a lot of skeletons there. This is just one. Cochrane had it sent to England, where it was examined at the British Museum by Charles Koenig. All right, here we go again. Of the magazine New Scientist. This is from March 29th, 1984. The article in this magazine is called "The Case of Miocene Man" by Michael Howgate and Alan Lewis. Go ape over British creationism, it says. Now it says here, in 1983, a Mr. W. R. Cooper published an article in the Australian creationist journal Ex Nihilo. He claimed that a totally human fossil had been found in supposed 25 million year old lower Miocene deposits on the West Indian island of Guadeloupe. The specimen, which was presented to the British Museum in 1812, was, according to Cooper, hidden from the gaze of the public after the advent of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. Such a deliberate concealment of evidence, says Cooper, is hardly in accord with the scientific integrity and objectivity of which evolutionists have hitherto boasted. In fact, it speaks of nothing but downright dishonesty. This conspiracy of silence, claimed Cooper, was because the skeleton was positive proof of the biblical deluge, as it supposedly showed damage consistent with the catastrophic inundation, and as the true human fossil from the Miocene, it demolished the concept of the geological timescale and consequently all theories of human evolution. All right, that's what he's saying. This Cooper guy is saying, hey man, that debunked all your theories. This bone from the Miocene. All right, and you can see this picture right here. It looks like a lot better picture than the ones we were seeing earlier. It can actually looks like it's embedded into the rock. All right, it says Cooper paid several visits to the Natural History Museum in London during the course of his researches. In stark contrast to his claim of a cover-up, the museum, in the presence of Dr. Chris Stinger and Robert Krusinski, was more than willing to show him the forbidden specimen despite its inaccessibility. The specimen had been consigned to the top of a cabinet in the basement after being on public display for many years between 1882 and 1967. The synopsis of the contents of the British Museum, 53rd edition, this is from 1848. I guess it's listing with the contents that it has and some of the reports on it. At the west end of the room is the fossil human skeleton embedded in limestone. Embedded in limestone, brought from Guadalupe by Admiral the Honourable Sir Alexander Cochrane and presented to the British Museum by the Lords Commissioners of the Admiralty. All right, so that's all that is in this book. This was a list because they're talking about their exhibits. All right, so it says the most striking specimen is called the Elephanus Canisa, which is placed in the middle of the room. All right, and then it says at the west end of the room is the fossil human skeleton. So they're letting you know that this is real. All right, embedded in limestone, brought from Guadalupe, a human skeleton. Where is it today? All right, I'm at the Linda Hall Library. It says here Science, Engineering, and Technology. In the fine print here, it says the Guadalupe skeleton found on the Isle of Grande Terre in Guadeloupe and given to the British Museum engraved plate from Charles Koenig's article in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society of London, 1814. All right, so we got a big lead right there. All right, so that's where that article is coming from, or the most scholarly one, and regarding its investigation, or officially what age it is, right? It's called The History of the Collections Contained in the Natural History Departments of the British Museum, Volume 1. It's from 1904. All right, we're on page 201 in this book of the historical collections that were in the British Museum. It says in 1813, noted here, a human skeleton in coral limestone from Guadalupe West Indies, captured on the taking of the island from the French by Sir Alexander Cochrane, RN, was presented by the Lords of the Admiralty. The specimen was described by Mr. Charles Koenig in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society of London, actually, in volume 104 in the year 1814, page 107. All right. Now, you know how long it took me to find this? So they have like numerous. So again, this was volume 104 that they got this report. And so man, there's like 200 volumes of this. It was so hard to find, but I did find it. So here it is right here, Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society of London for the year, it says 1814. In part 1, it says, all right, so we're going to go all the way to 107, page 107, like they told us, right? It says, on a fossil human skeleton from Guadalupe by Charles Koenig, Esquire, in a letter addressed to the Right Honorable Sir Joseph Banks, read February 10th, 1814. It says, the human skeleton embedded in limestone, lately brought from Guadalupe by the Honorable Sir Alexander Cochrane and presented by the Admiralty to the British Museum, having excited the curiosity of the public, I do myself the honor of submitting to you a short account of these fossil remains, which, though fully aware of the weight of those arguments you lately urged in conversation as unfavorable to the probability of their high antiquity, I am still led to consider as not altogether uninteresting to the geologist. On page 111, it says, the human skeletons from Guadalupe are called Galibi by the natives of that island, a name said to have been that of an ancient tribe of Caribs of Guyana, but which, according to your plausible conjecture, originated in the substitution of the letter L instead of R in the word Caribe. All right, so they're saying that they're really saying Caribe. The Galibi is really Caribe. I find no mention made of them by any author except General Ernoff in a letter to M. Fajas, same font inserted in volume 5, 1805 of the Annales du Museum, and by Laville in his Voyage of La Trinidad, published in 1813. The former of these gentlemen writes that on that part of the windward side of the Grand Terre called Le Mollet, skeletons are found enveloped in what he terms masses de madrepores petrifis, which being very hard and situated within the line of high water, could not be worked without great difficulty, but that he expected to succeed in causing some of these masses to be detached, the measurements of which he states to be about 8 feet by 2.5. All right, 8 feet by 2.5, and that's the exact size of the slab that they took to the British Museum. The blog brought home by Sir Alex Cochrane exactly answered this account. With regards to the measurements, its thickness was about 1.5 feet, because it weighed nearly two tons. 2 tons, all right? Its shape was irregular, approaching to a flattened oval, which here and there some concavities, the largest of which, as it afterwards appeared, occupying the place where the thigh bone had been situated, the lower part of which was therefore wanting, except the few holes evidently made to assist in the raising the block. The masons here declared that there was no mark of a tool upon any part of it, and indeed the whole had very much appeared of a huge model disengaged from the surrounding mass. All right, it was all from the same mass, the bones and the piece of limestone. The situation of the skeleton in the block was so superficial that its presence in the rock on the coast had probably been indicated by the projection of some of the more elevated parts of the left forearm. The operation of laying the bones open to view and of reducing the superfluous length of the block at its extremities being performed with all the care which its excessive hardness and the relative softness of the bones required, the skeleton exhibited itself in the manner represented in the annex drawing, with which my friend Mr. Alexander has been so good as to illustrate this description. The skull is wanting, a circumstance which is the more to be regretted, as this characteristic part might possibly have thrown some light on the subject under consideration, or would at least have settled the question whether the skeleton is that of a Carib, who used to give the frontal bone of the head a particular shape by compression, which had the effect of depressing the upper and protruding the lower edge of the orbits, so as to make the direction of their opening nearly upwards or horizontal instead of vertical. So he's saying If we had the skull, we could at least kind of tell maybe the nation or the race or the phenotype of this person, the bones. The vertebrae of the neck were lost with the head. The bones of the thorax bear all the marks of considerable concussion, all right? So they're letting you know what's there and what's what they're observing, what he's observing with these bones, and are completely dislocated. All the bones are dislocated and in concussion. All right, so it went through some damage. It seems like this person. The 7 true ribs on the left side, through their heads, are not in connection with the vertebrae, are complete, but only 3 of the false ribs are observable. On the right side, only fragments of these bones are seen. He has no ribs on the right side. But the upper part of the 7 true ribs of this side are found on the left, and might at first sight be taken for the termination of the left ribs, as may be seen in the drawing. The right ribs must therefore have been violently broken and carried over to the left side, all right? Violently broken. The ribs were violently. You hear what's going on? So remember the dude was saying this bone shows that it's been through some trauma, had to have been through the deluge or whatever, a cataclysm. Who knows, But definitely, if you do the science on it, it does look like it's been through some trauma, right? The body, these bones. The sternum must likewise lie concealed below the termination of the ribs. The small bone dependent above the upper ribs of the left side appears to be the right clavicle. The right os humerus lost. Of the left, nothing remains except the caudales in connection with the forearm, which is in the state of pronation. The radius of this side exists nearly in its full length, while at the ulna, the lower part only remains, which is considerably pushed upwards. Of the 2 bones of the right forearm, the inferior terminations are seen. Both the rows of the bones of the wrist are lost. But the whole metacarpus of the left hand is displayed together with part of the bones of the fingers. The first joint of the forefinger rests on the upper ridge of the os pubis. The 2 others, detached from their metacarpal bones, are propelled downwards and situated at the inner side of the femur and below the foramen magnum ischi of this side. Vestiges of 3 of the fingers of the right hand are likewise visible considerably below the lower portion of the forearm and close to the upper extremity of the femur. The vertebrae may be traced along the whole length of the column, but are in no part of it well defined, or the os sacrum of the superior portion only is distinct. It is disunited from the last vertebra in the ilium and driven upwards. The left os ilium is nearly complete, but shattered, and one of the fragments depressed below the level of the rest. The ossa pubis, through the well-defined, are gradually lost in the mass of the stone. On the right side, the os innominatum is completely shattered, and the fragments are sunk. But towards the acetabulum, part of the internal cellular structure is discernible. Continues says the thigh bones and the bones of the leg of the right side are in good preservation, but being considerably turned outwards. The fibula lies buried in the stone and it's not seen. The lower part of the femur of this side is indicated only by the bony outline and appears to have been distended by the compact limestone that fills the cavities both of the bones of the leg and thigh. So there's limestone filling these cavities. So how old is this bone? Think about it. Listen to that, right? So there's limestone filling the cavities both of the bones of the leg and thigh, into expansion of which these bones probably owe their present shattered condition. The lower end of the left thigh bone appeared to have been broken, right? Lost in the operation of detaching the block. The 2 bones of the leg, however, on this side are nearly complete. The tibia was split almost the whole of its length, a little below the external edge, and the fissure being filled up with limestone, now presents itself as a dark-colored straight line. The portion of the stone which contained part of the bones of the tarsus and metatarsus was unfortunately broken, but the separate fragments are preserved. The whole of the bones, when first laid bare, had a moldering appearance, and the hard surrounding stone could not be detached without frequently injuring their surface, but after an exposure for some days to the air, they acquired a considerable degree of hardness. Sir H. Davy, who subjected a small portion of them to chemical analysis, found that they contained part of their animal matter and all their phosphate of lime. The calcareous rock in which these bones are embedded is an aggregate composed principally of sulfidic particles and the detritus of compact limestone. It readily dissolves in diluted nitric acid without leaving any evident residue. It says that the hardness of this limestone, as calculated by the degrees of impression made upon it by the mason's saw and chisel, surpasses that of statuary marbles. Harder, right? It's very, very hard. From this description of the rock, it will be sufficiently clear that it is by no means of a stalactical nature and cannot therefore be compared either with travertino or any other chemical calcareous deposition of this kind. Now, down here in the same book, it says, respecting the age of these fossil remains, if not much positive information can be derived from the preceding details, they will prove at least that the enveloping rock is not of a stalastic nature and that the bones, after they were deposited, underwent a degree of violence which dislocated and fractured them, without removing the fragments to a distance from each other. It may therefore be safely concluded that the surrounding mass must have been in a soft or semi-fluid state, which, whilst it opposed to effectual resistance to a shock from without, readily filled up the chasms produced by it. From the composition of the stone, a late period may perhaps be assigned to its formation, yet there is nothing in the above description that necessarily implies a very recent origin. All right? You heard what he said. Nothing that he just said implies there's a recent origin. For although there are many instances of gravel and sand being quickly formed into hard masses, and even art has availed itself of this circumstance to produce from the granitic detritus a complete generated granite, in which cementations of loose siliceous grains oxide of iron is well known to be a powerful agent, yet we know of no limestone being formed as it were under the eyes of men, for stalactically concreted limestone, as I have already observed, should not be confounded with this. All right, I know this is a lot of science jargon, but I think all my scientists out there, he's straight up letting you know. All right, they found like gravel and sand, so that's what they're like. They're gonna let you know on these other conspiracy websites that that's what proves that it must be recent too, because they found some other gravel. He's letting you know that doesn't prove anything. All right. That doesn't prove anything. All right, it doesn't necessarily imply a very recent origin. The circumstance of these bones not being actually petrified and even retaining part of their gluten, though considered by some as proof of their recent deposition, is by no means conclusive. It's not conclusive just because the bones were really preserved, is what he's saying. They still had their gluten. Well, the water was hitting it, so maybe it was preserved really good with the water, the sea salt, right? But either way, he's letting you know, this is a scientist from the British Museum, the keeper there from natural history. All right, just letting you know he's the one examining this thing. This is the only report we got of this, bones that were found. All right, we already know what's up. We know America's the true old world. All right, he's letting you know the circumstance of these bones not being actually petrified, just because they're not petrified, and even retaining part of their gluten, though considered by some as proof of their recent deposition, meaning some say that this proves that it just fell into this layer, is by no means conclusive, for there does not seem to be any reason why lapidification of organic bodies should ever take place under circumstances unfavorable to that remarkable process. Accordingly, the bones in the Fletch limestone caverns and in the Bresch of Gibraltar, Dalmatia, etc., appear not to have made the least progress towards a petrified state. All right, those ain't petrified over there in France. What are you talking about? In the same limestone, but these bones ain't being petrified either. Now he ends this report. He says, "I have to apologize to you, my dear sir, for this very long letter on a subject which may possibly turn out to be interesting only so far, as the human bones from Guadalupe are unquestionably the only bones we are acquainted with that have ever been found embedded in a hard stony mass." All right, you hear that? These are the only bones or fossils of its kind. These are the only bones or archaeological finds of its kind at least at this time. I don't know if they found other ones like that after 1814, but he's letting you know that they've never found anything like this. embedded in a hard, stony mass that does not appear to belong to common stalactical calcareous depositions. This circumstance admits of being easily ascertained by a close inspection of the locality, and I am perfectly of your opinion that a comparison of the nature of the different varieties of shell sand with which the neighborhood of the Caribbean islands abounds would alone be sufficient to remove many doubts relative to the origin of the bed in question. The sand from thence which I had an opportunity of seeing was unlike that of which a stone is composed. I have the honor to remain, with every sentiment of respect, my dear sir. All right, your most obedient and obliged servant, Charles Koenig. All right, you can't put an age on this. He doesn't know. They don't know. They don't know the age. He didn't give an age, right? He didn't never in this report said how old it was. Again, he letting us know there's nothing to imply a very recent origin of these bones, of this stratus. This is all he said. He said you can't prove that it is or is not old. All right, now we're going back to recent times, right? We're in the Charleston Museum .org website. That says Storeroom Stories, Dr. Felix Herminer and the Fossil of Guadalupe. Now it's talking about the fossils of Guadalupe, speaks to the broad connections of Charlestown, as well as to the long history of the museum. A second Guadalupe specimen, a skeleton minus the skull, was found on board a French ship captured by the British in 1810. This find was deposited in the British Museum in 1813. The specimen attracted a great deal of attention and were originally believed to be of great antiquity. So what happened if they were believed to be of great antiquity? And therefore a scientific puzzle. It was a puzzle. They didn't know. Zoology keeper Charles Koenig studied the British Museum specimen in 1814, and Dr. James Moultrie published on the Charleston Museum skeleton in 1837. Naturalist George Cuvier studies the specimens in 1830 and determines that they were human bones from relatively recent times in concentrations of hardened sand. Interest in the specimens waned, and they and the site fell into oblivion. Oh, really? It got forgotten, swept underground. So this dude from 1830s came and said, "No, nope, it's from recent time." After after Charles Koenig already had told us, right? We went to the source. All right, us or everybody here, we went to the source. We already saw what he said. You can't prove. You don't know if it's old, if it's recent, right? You can't prove it. It's unconclusive. It was determined originally to believe to be of great antiquity. And I thought doing this video would be interesting. And if you want to do further research, I think that they should bring this out and do a real test and a modern test in front of all of us. Why do they have to hide? You know, talking about oldest bones in the world. At least if this is to be true, right? That these are the oldest bones in the world. This is old. It's embedded. This bone is embedded in this limestone, and they're hiding this. You know, this limestone is 28 million years old. Again, this was in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society of London, letter by Charles Koenig, the keeper there of natural history, in 1814. And you know that it's not conclusive to say this is recent. There's no proof of that. That's just conjecture. He's the scientist. He wrote it down in the scientific review, this scholarly journal. They have so many volumes of this. Again, this is volume 104 in 1814. All right, they're letting you know this is not taught in your schools. They won't even want you to think about this. Did you even know this existed? All right, so I wanted to dig into it, and here it is. That is the info